Hey, this is Nikki from One Life, and this is our student experience. Can we trust that the Bible is historically accurate? So the Bible is historically accurate, and we can read it and engage with it in that way. We can study Scripture from the standpoint that it is something that we can trust, and it can stand up to our history books. It can stand up to all of the questions and the doubts that we throw at it, and we can engage with it and study it in that way. We're going to start a new series and do something a little different than what we've done before. We are going to go through well-known Bible stories and look at them from a new perspective and ask questions like, who wrote this story? Why are they telling us this story? And how can we apply this story to our lives now in present day? We're going to kick this series off with a well-known story about Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. So the story that we are going to be in today is in the book of Daniel. Now the book of Daniel takes place in the kingdom of Babylon, which was in the state of Babylonia, also known as what you may have learned in history class, Mesopotamia. So these are real places, and that's part of the Bible being historically accurate. These aren't made up places like Narnia. They're places that are in our history books today. In fact, Babylon is in modern day Iraq. And in the 1800s, German archaeologists and historians actually uncovered some of King Nebuchadnezzar's statues and have even restored some of them. And you can go to Iraq and see these things that are in the book of Daniel today. So you could take a trip and see these things, that they are historically accurate and real life places. Now, to set this up, before we start reading this story in chapter 3 of Daniel, in chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had just asked Daniel to interpret a dream about a statue. He didn't like the interpretation that Daniel gave him because it basically said that he was not going to be the only king of Babylon. And in fact, he was going to fall and the entire kingdom of Babylon was going to fall as well. So we're going to show you an image on your screen of the statue, kind of a visual representation of how Daniel explained that dream and what that statue might have looked like. And so that'll kind of set up where we're coming into in chapter 3 of King Nebuchadnezzar building his own statue of himself for his kingdom and people to worship. So in Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it says this: King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. Then they stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. A herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, you are to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation and language fell down and worshiped the gold statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Just to kind of explain this a little bit, because there was a lot going on there. These satraps and all of these different people would have been the governing body. So if you're thinking like city commissioners and the governors and state representatives and all these different government officials were called to come to one place to this dedication of the statue. Now, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego had been appointed as political officials in the kingdom of Babylon. They had been given that right through what had already been done through them, what God had already done through them and Daniel. They had earned favor with King Nebuchadnezzar, and they had been appointed to this political position. The other political people that were present there were not crazy about having Jews serve at the same level as them, and so they were always looking for some way to undermine them. And so in this case, the Chaldeans went to King Nebuchadnezzar and they kind of speak to his ego, and they're like, you said, and they didn't do what you said, so you need to punish them for this. So that's where we're leaving off. So as we pick back up in verse 13, it says, then in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary, and he commanded some of the best soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So these men in their trousers, robes, head coverings, and other clothes were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was so urgent and the furnace extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. So King Nebuchadnezzar really liked Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. He had appointed them to these political positions, and he did not want to kill them. So he gives them one more chance. He says, this is what they're saying, but I know that you guys will do what I'm saying. So I'm going to give you one more chance. When you hear all this music, just bow down and worship. And Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, knowing that their life is on the line, they say to him, we can't do it. And we know that our God can deliver us from this. But even if our God doesn't deliver us, even if he lets us die in this furnace, still we are going to worship him. We're not going to worship your gods. So they make this bold stand in faith. We're going to pick back up in verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm. He said to his advisors, didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? Yes, of course, your majesty, they replied to the king. He exclaimed, look, I see 4 men not tied, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and called, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When the satraps, prefects, governors, and the king's advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair on their heads was singed. Their robes were unaffected, and there was no smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angels and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb and his house made a garbage dump. For there is no other God who is able to deliver like this. Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So when Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego stepped out in faith, knowing the power of God, that they could be saved, they changed the minds of King Nebuchadnezzar and all of the other political officials. King Nebuchadnezzar does a complete 180 in his decree and turns around and decrees that anyone who says anything bad about the God of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, the true God, will be ripped limb from limb and their houses will be turned into a garbage dump. It's a pretty harsh decree. Here's the thing though, with King Nebuchadnezzar, he already knew that the God of Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego was this powerful. He already knew that he was the one true God, but he had forgotten and he needed to be reminded again. Sometimes we will have people in our lives that will continuously need to be reminded of our faith and what we believe in. And we have to be willing to continue to stand up every time that we're pushed against in our faith. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. We're going to get some questions on the screen for you to help you engage with Scripture in a way that you can test its historical accuracy. So please take a moment to go through the Scripture with these questions and explore the book of Daniel a little bit more. Now, ultimately, we are not going to be facing a fiery furnace like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. But as I mentioned before, we are going to come up against people time and time again that are going to question our faith. And this world is going to offer us opportunities to turn away from God and worship other things and put ourselves in the control of our lives instead of obeying God's will for our life. Now, I know from experience, and I've seen this in other people's lives as well, that even when you make the hard decision and you stand on your faith, people will respect you more than if you're half in, half out on your decisions. If you 1 minute stand firm on your faith and then the next minute go with what everybody else wants you to go with, that is when people are going to ridicule you and truly start to walk away from you. When you stand boldly and firmly in your faith, people respect that. People are drawn to that. And just like with King Nebuchadnezzar and the other political people of that day, they will see God in those moments and they will have their views changed because of your faithfulness. So here in just a moment, we're going to have some practical application questions to where you can take this story about Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego and apply it to your real life throughout the week. Thank you so much for joining us for this new series in Students. And as always, keep seeking and keep searching.